Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for part 2 of painting a pet portrait in watercolors. I had originally set out to make this a 3-part series, but I decided to do it as 2 parts because the second part seemed to jump around quite a bit and I didn't see a logical point for cutting off and doing a third video. So in order to keep this video a little bit more concise, I have sped up certain parts of the painting where I bounce around, but I'll explain what I'm doing. So first things first, when I go back to do a second coat, I like to do the eyes. I like to outline the darker part with a bit more Prussian blue. I usually stick with blues and purples for around the eyes with a larger focus on blue just because it doesn't come across as a black eye as much for some reason in my mind. I just like the way the blue looks very similar to black. So now I'm going to go in and add some texture to the nose. So I'm using my brush to add dots all over the nose. I like to bounce the brush off the page quite rapidly, using a variety of colors to reference black. So once again, I'm using that Prussian blue, that dark purple, and I'm using a bright pink. It's called rose pink, permanent rose. So now I'm going in and adding a second coat to a lot of the parts of her face, her ears, basically everything. So when I'm doing the second coat, I'm also doing the clear water first, so that when I go in, it'll create another gradient. So I'm just going in and adding those lines, those hair markings, again, just like I did on the first one, except this time I'm not adding as much clear water first, so you're seeing more of those lines come through. So I sped it up quite a bit, but basically I'm taking my time and I'm just slowly adding those hair markings. And because I'm going over in areas that are quite a bit lighter, you're able to see them more so than you would on the first coat where they blend into the water. So I try to stick to colors that suit the colors that are coming underneath them. So if I have pink, I'll put red over top. If I have purple, I'll darken it with more purple and blue. Like what I did on the mouth, I'm adding complementary colors over top. Colors that look good when placed over top. So now I notice her eyes are quite dark, so I'm coming in and adding a very dark coat over top, right near the eyes where it's its darkest, and then I'm feathering out that color. If at any point during the video you find I'm going too fast, just remember to pause it and take your time. I've been doing this for quite a while, so my brush work is quick, if not this quick, but it is a little bit speedier just due to a lot of practice. But take your time. Adding these hair strokes should be a little bit time consuming at first, and you want to make sure that they're not all going in the exact same direction, so you're always kind of turning your hand around, moving it, so that you don't have just all similar lines going exactly the same way. That's not the way hair grows, so that's not the way we want to display it on the dog. So it's tricky to pinpoint exactly what I'm doing at every stage in terms of like breaking it down so you can copy it exactly, but the gist of it is that I'm always bouncing around from place to place, adding more and more layers over top, and always using the tip of my brush to create that fur. So I just want to reiterate that when I'm adding that second layer, I'm always using a color that goes well with the color that's underneath it. So you won't typically see me adding yellow over top of blue, or I won't add, trying to think of other examples, like I won't add orange over top of purple. I tend not to go for warm and cool together. It's not that I never do, it's just that it's more rare that I will combine the two. They tend to create a brown if you are not careful. So I'm just mindful of keeping it a similar color over top. So if you're wondering where to start as far as adding in that second layer, it's always a good rule of thumb to just look for the shadows on the reference photo and try to follow those shadows. So I'm looking for the darker values initially, but as I move along, I'm looking for values that maybe aren't as glaringly obvious, but that are definitely a little bit darker. So on the top of the head, she has small, subtle shadows that I'm just exaggerating. The key with painting a really good pet portrait is to have a good reference photo. So ideally one that has some interesting lighting or that shows some good contrast. Sometimes when I'm painting pet portraits, I'll be given a reference photo that's quite old and you don't get that contrast, but sometimes you have to exaggerate the features that you know are there, and some of that just comes with practice. As the painting progresses, I do like to add more and more texture, so you'll see me refining some of those hair strokes as I move along. So now comes the point in the painting where I'm really now going over again and again, refining those darker areas with more and more fur. I do really like to have quite a few layers. So while it is often made up of about 3, sometimes it can be quite a bit more. So I'm still using my dagger brush and I'm just moving around. I did link the dagger brush that I use in the video description below, but really any brush that you have with a fine tip on it will work great. I never leave my paintbrushes in water. Well, at least I try not to. I shouldn't say never, because sometimes I'll come into my office and see it sitting in the water and it's been in there all day, which is super frustrating. But most of the time I try not to leave them in water. It just helps keep the tips nicer and keep the shape better. So I'm just going in for that third coat now around the eyes. And that's just following a similar pattern to the first coat, except I'm not adding clear water first. So now I'm just adding some subtle little lines to define those darker areas even more. They won't show up a lot on the final piece. You won't see like a huge contrast, but you don't want to, because if you look at the reference photo, you don't actually see a lot of those hairs. The key with my pieces, I find, is to insinuate that there's a lot of fur there without drawing each individual hair strand. I've been working with oil paints a lot lately, and I find that I'm more drawn to styles that are a little bit more suggestive in terms of hair versus the realism where you're literally going in and drawing all of the hair. There's multiple ways to capture that. I find leaving those white areas blank can actually provide relief for the eye. So I think sometimes when people are starting out, there's a tendency to fill in the entire page with color, but I actually like to leave some of the lighter areas completely white. Even with a black dog, I will have areas that are completely left out. So as I near the finish, I am now finessing certain areas. I'm going to start working on the eyes again. So I like to add black around the eyes. I use a lamp black. I know it's a bit controversial in watercolors whether or not to use black. I guess that's true of oil painting or acrylic painting. Some people are just firm believers that you should never use black, but I enjoy it. I think it makes the eyes really pop to have it be one of the few areas that you actually use black. So I'll use it for the eyes, I'll use it for the center of the eyes as well as the nose. Unless the dog has really light eyes, especially blue eyes, I will use just blue for the center. Right now they look a little bit odd because she has such dark eyes, but I'm not worried about that because I know that when it dries, I'm going to come in and darken it yet again. So what you didn't just see is I was blow drying it to speed up the drying process so that it allows me to come in and darken it with some raw umber. So I'm basically massaging around the outside of the eye inward so that it picks up on some of the black and makes the eyes as dark as possible. Sometimes in the photos, the eyes can look pure black, but I know that Luna doesn't have black eyes. They're just an incredibly dark brown. So I'm allowing them to stay a tiny bit lighter than the reference photo. So now I'm going to go on to my favorite part. I use a white gouache. It shows acrylic ink in the little jar, but that's actually not what's in there. It's a white gouache that I've filled it with. And I use that to go in and add those white markings. I don't dilute it very much with water. I have a spray bottle that I fill it with every once in a while so that it's still workable. But I find adding the white paint after just adds it adds dimension to the portrait. So it adds those highlights. It allows you to go back in, and you don't have to use a lot of masking fluid initially because you know that you can come in after and add some of those tiny hairs. So I'm bouncing around the painting, adding all those little white hairs where I see them in the reference photo. They will dry a little bit darker, so I'm always kind of mindful of that. You can't get that true white like you'd get on the page. So that's everything I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot from this video. If you have any questions at all about how to paint a watercolor pet portrait, be sure to leave a comment. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, I love to hear about those as well. If you paint your own pet portrait, tag me on Instagram. It's whitehouse_art. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.